Today, I am going to tell you a tale, but not just any tale. An internet horror story that at its core is one of the most disturbing video game creepypastas ever created. There will be a lot to take in during this video, as the narrative is quite long. First, I will be establishing a lengthy synopsis of the creepypasta as a whole, while simultaneously analyzing and dissecting key moments, characters, and symbolism. After that, I will discuss the story in retrospective fashion by exploring its impact on modern-day creepypastas, then end it all off by interpreting where the future of this story will go next. So sit back, relax, maybe grab yourself a snack, and prepare yourself for the infamous story behind the one and only. The 1980s is one of the most influential decades in video game history. If you were around during this time, you would have witnessed the rise and fall of all things gaming. Up until 1983, various consoles and titles were being pushed out left and right, many of these titles being extremely similar to others. It was at this point when the infamous video game crash of 1983, also known as the Atari crash in Japan, spawned a tidal wave that saturated the worldwide video game market. Fortunately, this crash only lasted a few years, and it gave the opportunity for the soon-to-be influential video game corporation, Nintendo, to step in. In October 1985, the Nintendo Entertainment System was released in North America. With iconic launch titles such as Duck Hunt, Wrecking Crew, and Super Mario Bros., the system exceeded all expectations, as family households rushed to purchase this device, thus reviving the once-deceased video game market. This in turn paved the way for other corporations to succeed, such as Sega with Sonic the Hedgehog, and Sony with the debut of the PlayStation. But with the NES came many interesting games, one of which was released a mere few years after the launch of the console. Godzilla, Monster of Monsters, released in December 1988, is a game where you play as Godzilla and Mothra, fighting giant monsters on each planet across the solar system, aiming to reach Planet X, where King Ghidorah awaits a final battle. The gameplay is what you would expect for a late 1980s title. You start on Earth, which is represented by a hexagonal map, where you can move either Godzilla or Mothra in a chess-like pattern. Each of these hexagons contains a playable side-scrolling level, where enemies attack and shoot at you. The goal is to advance both Godzilla and Mothra to the next planet by finishing the base headquarters level on the opposite end of each map. In addition to this, there are between 2 to 8 monster boss battles on each planet that attempt to block you as you progress. These giant monsters, also known as kaiju, move on the map like you do, and if you happen to move beside one or have one move right next to you, a battle will begin. During these battles, you have roughly 40 seconds to defeat the kaiju, and if done successfully, they will disappear from the map and you may continue on. The entire game consists of 8 worlds, these being Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Pluto, Neptune, and Planet X. On these planets, you will encounter a total of 8 monsters, 7 of which are often found repeated across multiple worlds. These 7 are Ghazora, Moguera, Varan, Baragon, Hedorah, Gigan, and Mechagodzilla. The last one, King Ghidorah, is a super strong kaiju that may only be found during the endgame on Planet X. But you're probably wondering how such a simple NES game like this could have anything remotely terrifying attached to it. Well, there's something dark that came from this title a mere 2 decades after its release that spawned a revolution of video game horror stories alike. The NES Godzilla creepypasta is regarded as one of the most disturbing, legendary, and lengthy video game creepypastas of all time. Originally submitted to the horror site Bogleach by user CosbyDaff in 2011, it has become most notable for containing various amounts of screenshots that add to the realism of the story. The creepypasta is told from the perspective of a man named Zachary, who recounts the night he received a Godzilla, monster of monsters, from his childhood friend Billy. The reason Zachary received this game is because of his obsession with it as a child. He states how he was gifted it for his birthday back in the day, but later traded it in for another game, something he regretted for many years. After booting up the cartridge and being flooded with nostalgia, everything began as normal. The title sequence, first world, and levels were all like he remembered, up until that first fight with Ghazora, that is. You see, partially through battle, the game glitched out, and Zach had a hard time getting any attacks in. Like I said earlier, battles only last for a maximum of 40 seconds at a time, before you have to restart and try again. But Zach explains, this fight lasted for 5 minutes, before the entire screen began glitching, and became unplayable. As most NES players would, he pulled the cartridge out from the console, blew in it, and reset the game. Afterwards, everything seemed back to normal. Zachary finished playing Earth with nothing out of the ordinary and proceeded to the next level, Mars. But this is where problems began arising again. After defeating Ghazora for a second time, the screen began glitching out again, this time with Ghazora's eye spawning all over the screen in a dark red color. At this point in the narrative, Zack proclaims his regret on ignoring these glitches, foreshadowing something more sinister later on in the story. But of course, as most creepypastas go, he continues on anyway. In the next boss battle, he encounters Moguera, this time twice the size he is normally. After a swift fight, instead of sinking to the bottom of the screen after death, as per usual, Moguera's sprite shattered and began melting, which of course never actually happens in the real game. Then, strange enough, Zack found the next monster to be Titanosaurus, a kaiju never before seen in the original game. Nothing strange happened during this battle, which led Zack to believe he must have an early copy of the game, which would explain the glitches, never before seen effects, and new monsters. After fighting his way to victory and proceeding through Earth's headquarters level, he expected to be greeted by the word Jupiter, but instead was confronted with a new planet, Pathos. If you thought things were wrong before, then this is the moment when everything in the game broke down. Upon initial glance of the world map, Zack noticed many irregularities from the game he remembered. Instead of green, the color of the map was blue. The level icons changed from their usual shape to strange rock-like structures. The music was also more ominous, giving Zack an unsettling feeling. And in addition to these changes, he noticed a new character on the board, Biolante, who wasn't even created until 1989, a whole year after the creation of Godzilla NES. Zack kept convincing himself this was still an unreleased version of the game, possibly even created to hype up the upcoming 1989 Godzilla movie at the time. But oh, was he so wrong. The levels were ominously empty, void of all enemies and ambience. In contrast to the unsettling red moon above the player's head. But it wasn't until the boss battles where things took a wild turn. Although their kaiju on the board looked as they normally do, the monsters during battle were completely wrong in every way possible. These mutated beasts, like most things shown so far, were never ever seen in the original game. In fact, none of them even currently exist within the entire Godzilla universe. And I know I keep saying this over and over, but bear with me for a moment here. Although these moments Zack experienced could be described as eerie, unnatural, and/or disturbing, they aren't even the most unforgiving part of this narrative, as it's at the end of Pathos where the most pivotal moment of the game steps in. The moment that changes everything about this story. What you just watched is the infamous chase level. It's at this point in the story where Zack's mood pulls a full 180 and shifts into panic, shock, and confusion. It's also the moment where we meet Red, the demonic-looking spider creature aimed to instill a specific type of fear into the protagonist and the reader. However, Zachary's thoughts quickly fade when he realizes this entire game is most likely just the cartridge hack, something his friend Billy might have even made. But even if it wasn't Billy, Zack knew there couldn't be anything supernatural about a video game. Even with a character as terrifying as Red, who I will come back to later on in the story, by the way. But in order to save time on the rest of the synopsis, I'm going to delve into 3 significant plot points from this moment on, those being the Red chases, the upcoming quiz levels, and Zack's painful history. In the next 5 worlds, named Trance, Dementia, Entropy, Extus, and Zenith, which take the place of the planets Jupiter through Planet X, Zack comes across a strange mechanic that unintentionally adds the inexplicable cherry on top to the story. Meet Face, who is just that, an unequivocal face who resides within the quiz levels. In these levels, marked with a question mark on the world map, Zack finds 2 boxes with yes and no marked inside them, and Face perched in between. On each planet from this point on, Face asks Zack a series of 12 questions, some of them as simple as, is the sun hot, or is water wet? But sometimes, they are a little too personal, such as, do you like hurting people? Or, have you been stolen by a family member? Whilst yes, the premise is disturbing, Face is never actually hostile, and there are no right or wrong answers according to our narrator. Only 23 reactions Face will showcase upon Zack selecting yes or no. 11 of them he figured out, but 12 of them not quite. Nonetheless, this was always a recurring event on each of the levels, something that felt like a breather for Zachary. Zack sometimes even received new characters to play as from Face, up until the ending, that is, which I will come back to later. Next comes Red. Unfortunately, its chase levels are also recurring, but with a twist in each iteration. At the end of Trance, the same planet where Zack met Face for the first time, Red's level begins with platforming obstacles that Red crushes and eats as it chases Zack. It differs slightly from the first encounter, nonetheless still follows the same mechanics. But the true terror comes when Zack outruns Red and beats the chase level. In ecstatic gamer fashion, Zachary proudly roars, "Not this time, asshole." However, the second after that final word slips off his tongue, Red's head turns and faces the screen with this deadly stare. After this unexpected timing, Zack's blood runs cold, and panic takes control of his body. But once again, he quickly calms down, and most of his fears subside. It's this moment that adds to the overall realism of the narrative. You see, many creepypastas at the time relied on hyper-realistic graphics, and the narrator being oblivious to the fact that such things just don't happen in real life. The fact that Zack ultimately dismisses Red's stare as just a coincidence and holds on to the idea that he's playing a hacked cartridge is a long departure from what most creepypasta writers did at the time. And in my opinion, it's more realistic, and therefore a lot scarier. Although we know that something very wrong will end up happening to Zack later on, due to the nature of this story, we still have a moment of empathy for him during this scene, as it's also how our mind would work if we were ever put in this scenario. However, that all gets thrown out the window when Zack finally arrives on Entropy, the sixth world in this story. After navigating through a series of harrowing levels, Zack finds himself in a more tranquil, yet unnerving one. Completely void of monsters, with nothing but a large pale moon and an empty grass plain, Zack feels something familiar about this place. After a bit of navigating, he comes across a body of water. At this moment, the moon breaks open, and a curled up humanoid figure falls into the water, and seconds later, a monster dubbed as the Moon Beast appears. But this is when the game truly shows its metaphysical side, and shatters that boundary between reality and fantasy, as this appears on Zack's TV. And that now leads us into the third segment from the latter half of this creepypasta, Zachary's painful history. To save time and my own effort on trying to explain this to you, I am going to read you an excerpt from the story that explains this segment in greater detail. Back when I was in middle school, I had a girlfriend named Melissa. She suffered from some kind of mental disorder that caused her to go into episodes. When she was in an episode, she would stand or sit perfectly straight and still, and her face would instantly lose any expressions she had before. She would speak very clearly without any hint of emotion. When it was over, she would start trembling and sometimes bury her face in her hands and remain silent for several minutes. I can't really convey the feeling it gave me in words, and I won't try. You had to see this in person to understand. But despite this, she was a very kind person, and I cared about her dearly. We liked to hang out in a field at night and look at the stars. But one night, she didn't say anything to me at all. She just stared directly at the moon, trembling. I tried to talk to her, but she suddenly sprung up and ran right into traffic. I tried to stop her, but I was too late. She got hit by a truck and was killed that night. I looked her right in the eyes when the wheels went over her neck. That sight has always haunted me. It's after this scene where the story reveals its secret symbolism that has been hiding in plain sight all over the narrative. First, we can view such symbolism hiding within the names of the planets, specifically pathos, trance, and dementia. These are qualities relating to Melissa's tragedy stemmed from the illness that forced her into periods of suspended animation, and her eventual death that Zachary has a difficult time reflecting back on. We can also find this symbolism in the beginning of the story when Zach experiences the first of his few glitches. Remember that battle with Gazora where the screen glitches into a sequence of red eyes that spawn all over the screen? Well, it wouldn't be too doubtful to pinpoint this as a symbol for Red's Eye. Watching the narrator play and waiting for the moment to reveal itself to him, especially since we now know something in this game is sentient and is attempting to communicate with Zachary. But it's all these pieces of symbolism, combined with Melissa's tragic fate, face, and Red, that come together at the end to form the ultimate climax of this creepypasta. Bear in mind, this ending does have mixed reviews. It's either a you love it or hate it type scenario, so I highly suggest you read it for yourself and make up your own mind. But the story ends like this. Zack notices a level with a cross symbol on it and discovers it's actually a graveyard. He enters the graveyard and finds a hovering figure he dubs as the Angel. Red then appears and devours said angel, and Zack flees and loads the final world, Zenith. Here, he first enters the quiz level, as per usual, only to find that Face has been killed. He continues on and fights through a series of grotesque monsters, until he arrives to his ultimate showdown with Red. During this battle, any attack Red hit him with in the game, Zack felt in real life, including the immeasurable pain felt by Red's fire blasts. Zack also had no control over his body anymore. He couldn't even turn off the game at this point, only use his fingers on the controller to attempt a victory, or die a painful death. He had an incredibly difficult time getting any hits on Red, as it was crushing all of his characters. Without any other hope, Zack sends in his last character, Godzilla. Here, Red tells Zachary that it was the one who killed Melissa. Red was the virus in her brain, responsible for her episodes and eventual death. A now distraught and angry Zack not only fights for his life, but for the life of his dear friend Melissa. However, before Zack could even attempt to destroy this beast, Red opens its grotesque maw as wide as possible and consumes Godzilla whole. Ready to accept his death, Zack gives up. But moments later, the angel from earlier interrupts the battle and reveals itself to be the spirit of Melissa. She confesses Red has been torturing her spirit and warns that Red will do the same to Zack if he loses this battle. And just before she fades away, she bestows Zachary with a new character. From here, Zack returns to the battle with Red and effortlessly defeats the entity with his brand new gift. After defeating Red, Zack finds he has been teleported back to the graveyard, and Melissa thanks him for saving everyone and promises they will see each other again. During the epilogue, which takes place 3 weeks later, Zack finds himself still shaken up from the experience. During those weeks, he confronted his friend Billy about the game, who understandably has no idea what he's even talking about. Billy then proceeds to talk to the person he got the game from, but the same thing happened, and so on. No one ever experienced what Zack experienced. It was a personalized game, just for him. He thought a lot about destroying it, even wanting to toss it into the lake, but he couldn't. Half of him wanted to keep it intact because of the experience and because of Melissa. During the last few sentences of the story, Zack admits he put it up for sale on eBay, not because of the money or anything, but because he doesn't want to be the one responsible for the cartridge. And in that last sentence, the game is live on eBay, and Zack patiently waits for someone to take it off his hands. Oh, wow. Thank you for bearing with me through that very lengthy synopsis and side analysis. Now that's out of the way, let's look back and see why this story is what it is. As you are aware by the title of this video, I suggested that Godzilla NES is the scariest creepypasta of all time. Let me dive into why I believe that to be true. According to Venngage, whom studied 72 popular creepypastas, they discovered there are a total of 7 vital elements required for crafting the perfect creepypasta story. First, you need the narrative to be written in a first-person perspective. This gives the tale a more personal touch, like a friend telling you a story. Secondly, it needs to explore unexplained phenomena, something that the reader won't know about, thus allowing the element of suspense and/or surprise to take control. Additionally, the story should delve into themes of death or tragedy, include some sort of monster or supernatural entity, showcase fear via photos and/or videos, and finally, end on a cliffhanger. If we look back at Godzilla NES, we can easily match each of these themes to different parts of the story. The creepypasta is told from Zack's own first-person perspective. Unexplained glitches and metaphysical events occur throughout the game. We are greeted with a terrifying entity with supernatural abilities. We discover the tragic death of Zack's girlfriend was caused by that same entity. It has highly detailed screenshots and footage of the entire game, and it all ultimately ends with Zack finally putting the game up for sale online, leaving us wondering where the cartridge ends up next. And it's all of these elements that, when put together, form one of the most disturbing and well-written creepypastas of all time. If you compare these points to other classics, such as Ben Drowned, Squidward Suicide, or even the Russian Sleep Experiment, you will notice they all share a similar pattern, but Godzilla is written differently. Its unique structure is split into various chapters, each ending on their own mini cliffhanger, in what could only be assumed to keep the viewer engaged. Zack was also not your typical protagonist. A lot of the time, main characters follow creepypasta cliches that make us scream at our computer screen at how delusional they can be. But Zack dismisses most disturbing story elements as complete coincidences, something that any conventional person would do in real life. That is, up until the game enters his mind and pulls out his darkest memories, of course. But I mean, I'm sure we'd all be freaking out at that point too. But as I stated earlier, many who have read this creepypasta agree that the ending is a little too far-fetched from the rest of the story, especially when he ends up selling the damn cartridge on eBay of all places. Like, come on man, you said he didn't do it to be selfish, yet you are giving someone else a game that could potentially kill them. Anyway, it does leave the story open for more, and that is actually the reason why it ends like this. You see, there has been a sequel to this creepypasta in the works for many years, titled NES Godzilla Replay. In this story, a guy named Carl purchases Godzilla Monster of Monsters from Zack on eBay and discovers his own personalized anomalous adventure. The story is still in development, but parts and snippets of it exist out there, as far as I'm concerned. But the reason this sequel isn't ready yet, and I'd say this is also the reason why the original creepypasta is proclaimed as one of the best, is because the author, Cosbydaff, is actually a professional artist. They are the one who created every single monster, anomaly, and terrifying moment found within the screenshots of the original story. They are also the one building the world of the sequel from the ground up. But for now, we will just have to wait for the long-awaited sequel to find out what eventually happens after the game is booted up again. But as always, thank you so much for watching, and good night.